right, welcome to San Diego Comic-Con, staying at home 2020. This is, in case you're watching, which would be awesome, this is the Breaking into Comics and Staying in Comics panel. And let me introduce my guest. This is presented by Comics Experience, the online comic book school. And we've got in one corner Mr. Sanford Greene, the artist and creator of Bitter Root, and also an art instructor at Benedict College. Sanford, welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me.
And Bon Alimagno, the former editor-in-chief of Vampirella magazine, former talent coordinator at Marvel Comics, and currently Comics Experience's Creators Workshop director, as well as a pretty awesome dude. Welcome, Bon.
Thanks, Andy.
And
Thanks,
I'm Andy Schmidt. I'm the president of Comics Experience, a former Marvel and IDW editor, a writer of comics and video games and assorted stuff. And I also teach some of the Comics Experience courses on writing. So with that, we've got a pretty cool panel. If anybody wants to learn more about Comics Experience, that's at comicsexperience.com. We'll put that info up for you. And you can sign up for our newsletter, which would be awesome. But we are going to talk about, from I think several different angles, first of all, what it means to break into comics. Because when I was, a young lad, breaking into comics meant something really specific to me. And I remember the moment when I realized that what I meant when I said that wasn't what everybody else necessarily heard. That this wasn't some universal meaning that we all had. I also think that definition may have changed over the last decade and a half. So I'm curious, for me, I grew up a superhero reading person. So it was kind of, working at Marvel or DC, either as a creator or as, an editor, which is where I wound up starting. What did you guys think? Did you consciously think about breaking into comics? I got to break in. And once I'm in, the assumption is you stay there forever.
Well, I guess from my standpoint, it was always I grew up in a small town, and the understanding of, there was no understanding. We had no frame of reference for this profession. All I knew was what I saw on television on Saturday mornings. I saw, Superman, Spider-Man, cartoons. And, even at a young age, I knew that someone had to have produced this stuff. It didn't come out of thin air. It's not a machine that did this stuff. It was some human hands. So I was just fascinated just from that standpoint of just wanting to understand more about how do you do it? How do you get to the place to where you're able to do something like that? And lo and behold, comics kind of came. It was the bridge that I learned when I went to a local Kmart, when those exist back then, and I saw a spinner rack. I brought visual aids today, so talk about. But I saw the spinner rack that had comics, and it was my first time seeing that stuff, and it fascinated me because I started to connect the dots when I saw characters on these covers, those comic covers that I saw on Saturday mornings, or cartoons. So I'm like, wait a minute. So these are the same, or maybe perhaps the people that do these comics, they might be connected to drawing these cartoons as well. So that's how I got into comics, was because I honestly wanted to do the cartoons, and I thought that was kind of the gateway to getting to, drawing cartoons. So, and to some degree that is the case, right? But so with a little bit of resources or knowledge that I had, I was able to kind of assess and come up with a conclusion that they're connected. So to some degree, in a weird way, me getting into comics was because I wanted to get into drawing cartoons.
That makes sense. I was actually, when you started talking about being inspired by the cartoons, I was like, wait a second, did you want to do animation?
Exactly. Yeah, I want to do that. And that's the thing. I didn't understand that, you needed to be an animator. I just saw cartoons, and I'm like, okay, they're drawn, obviously, but how are they drawn? So I was fascinated in the process of it,
Right.
and then it made me more fascinated to want to possibly become, a cartoonist or animator.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Bon, how about you?
Yeah, it's I I grew up in a town outside of Philadelphia in South Jersey that had a couple of comic book stores. Um, and I would go in there and not so much a spinner rack, but like, floor to ceiling comics everywhere. And so I was really lucky that I just got presented with a wide variety of stuff. So even from a young age, I was reading all sorts of superhero comics, but independent comics too. Like I still have like some early issues of Jeff Smith's Bone, like somehow somewhere in storage. But it's like along the way, I got interested, similarly to Sanford, what you're just talking about, in the process, where I wanted to be a writer, but then I started getting enamored by how these comics were being put together. And Wizard Magazine at the time, when we still had Wizard Magazine, was like writing articles about people like Karen Berger working with Neil Gaiman, and like what Axel Alonso would be doing, and folks like that. And that just got really inspiring to me. And I just decided when I was going to go to college that I was going to become a comic book editor. And everyone who would talk to me about it would be like, that's kind of a crazy thing to just decide you're going to do. And I'm like, well, I'm going to give it a shot. I was at NYU for college. Uh, Started as an intern at Harris Comics, which published and owned Vampirella at the time. And that's how I met David Bogart, who all these years later is now like an SVP over at Marvel. And that's how I met Nicole Boos, who was one of the folks who introduced me to you, Andy. So it's just kind of bizarre how just things like that came together, where just an interest in pursuing editing actually led me down all these different roads, because it led me to that internship. But then just over the years, stayed in touch with David Bogart. And in 2009, when the Great Recession hit, and I was looking for new opportunities, there was an opening over at Marvel to join them as a talent coordinator. And I'd never been explicitly a talent coordinator in my entire life, but what I think David and CB got really interested in when we started talking was I was using this talent on Vampirella that was impressing them, and that they were actually bringing over to Marvel. And they were like, okay, we need someone who's got an eye for talent and knows how to work with talent, who can work with CB, work with David. And I seemed to somehow fit the bill. And so they brought me in there for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the things that you both hit on was the genuine interest and intrigue of, and then how that led you to an interest in the process of it. So I think it's worth always talking about it, at some level. If you're going to do a try and get into this as a career, you've got to have that really genuine sort of love for it, and or at least a big curiosity about how it works, and wanting to dive in, dissect it, and a bit of a drive, right, to be the best there is at what you're doing, or at least the best version of your own art as you can do. So I think it's really good in these panels to talk about, like, breaking in as an editor is not the same thing as breaking in as an artist or a writer or a colorist or a letterer. And there are different levels of it. So in your mind, breaking in could just be working in comics on anything that sees print, or it doesn't even have to see print anymore, right? There's digital comics, there's web comics, there's all kinds of stuff. So figuring out what it is, it's less about breaking in with this barrier, although there are some which we'll probably get a chance to talk about. But breaking in to, thinking of it more of just like, what do I want to do? Like, where is my genuine interest in this? Where does it start to funnel you specifically? Bon, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with balancing your interests with what it starts turning out you're good at. Like, I never thought I might be good at scouting and developing talent. It just sort of I just sort of stumbled upon that. And there's plenty of folks out there who maybe they want to start as like a writer, like Brian Bendis, right? Brian Bendis started because he wanted to be a cartoonist, and he just happened to also be a extremely talented writer. And then more and more people started hiring him for that specific skill, but not even the skill he wanted to start off with. So in a lot of ways, a lot of these companies and publishers, editors, talent scouts, whoever, you kind of have to keep your ear open to what are people most attracted about your skill set. Like you might be coming into the industry wanting to be a specific thing, and the next thing you know, someone's like, "Hey, wait, you're a really great letterer," and they're willing to pay you for that. Maybe not, they're not willing to pay you for your writing yet, but they're willing to pay you to be a letterer. So, that's a way to break in and start making money and getting a paycheck. And then eventually you'll be able to start with those connections, getting writing gigs, getting the other gigs maybe that you want.
I think if I could chime into that, it just made me think about just, going a little farther into, my interest in comics was, again, kind of a secondary venture, because I was so fascinated with the actual animation aspect of things. I kept getting more comics because it was my only learning material at the time. And again, not having resources, I wasn't aware of any kind of animation schools. There really weren't a whole lot coming up. I did, because of comics, I did took notice to the Joe Kubert School at the time. They would have the ads in the back of the comics, and that was like, the holy grail for me. And that was like Mecca. It's like traveling just to, have the opportunity to go to that school. I think I was like, I don't know, 7th, 8th grade when I first saw the ads for that. And it was my mission in life to go to Joe Kubert School, because that was the direct correlation to from this comic thing and getting that opportunity to go into the to animation. But again, I'm in the 7th grade, so this is still another 5-6 years of school that I had to endure to get to that point. And over that time period, of course, my whole perspective begins to change, because I'm still buying these comics, and before I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, I think I like this comic medium a little more than I like this animation. I still want to do it because I didn't have full knowledge of it, but I realized, wait a minute, I can do this comic thing right now, or at least, on the level of just drawing and illustrating and putting into practice something that I already have, that's already tangible. The animation thing, I still hadn't had any kind of knowledge or understanding of how to the process of that. So kind of a organic turn happened with me with the interest, and now I'm rethinking my career path. Right, I'm like, wait a minute, I think this comic book thing is just as valid, or something that is just as interesting to me as the animation side. So I'm learning, and plus I'm learning. Getting the books like How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way changed. Started to change my thinking when it came to that. So it's really, looking back on it, it really was one of those things where it was, weird kind of a happy accident. I'm looking in this one direction, and this entire time I'm learning this whole set of, skills, and again, it was academic. It was academic by, by what I had. It was just me and this book. And then I started to understand that there are, places like the Joe Kubert School, places, other source materials that I needed to learn anatomy and needed to learn perspective and things of that nature. So by the time I got out of high school, I was pretty much set, on where I wanted to go with a career.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I had a similar sort of experience where I didn't really know anything about editing comics. I had done a little bit of research into writing and art, and then I did an internship at Marvel Comics back in the 1900s, and and that was when I was like, oh, this is a thing. And then like watching the people I was helping in the offices was like, oh, this is a thing that I would really like. I'd really enjoy this, and I think I've got the skill set for this. Like I can be organized. I can, I like to dig into story and give notes, and I don't like want to write things for people. Like I don't want to tell them what they need to do with their story, but just kind of talk them through. And I also liked teaching. I was a teacher before I worked in comics. I taught at Webster University in outside of St. Louis, and so I think I did bring a little bit of that to my editorial, which I think was helpful, especially with younger artists that were starting out. That I think I helped them improve their storytelling and at least be able to explain like why I'm giving you a note. Instead of them always having to figure out, what's the note behind the note type thing. But yeah, I had that same thing where it was just like, oh, I never thought about this, but this is really, really cool. And this is really a lot of what I'm into right now. And I had started thinking I'd want to be a writer, and then I wound up getting to that later. Have you done any work in animation? I just got to ask now.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Full circle, man.
Okay.
I definitely got opportunities working. I just did some design work for Spiderverse, early development for it. So, and tons of stuff prior to that. As a matter of fact, I actually have a small animation studio. So it was, it's always been there. And I was like, I can't deny this feeling, man. I got into the comic industry, but it was still there. So, I just kept my hands in that circle, in that genre. And again, having the opportunity to grow in this industry, it kind of just started to lead me down that path anyway, because again, I was still interested. It's still my artistic style, viewpoint, what have you, is geared towards a lot of that. And so it started to garner attention from people that are in that industry. So in a roundabout way, they found me, versus me seeking out, people, in that industry. So, it was actually pretty, I felt like, okay, I didn't make a mistake by going in this direction, because sometimes you can get, our industry is very, at a time, maybe not now, but at a certain time, things were very insular and not as the viewpoints and artistic direction wasn't vast as it is right now. You had your quote unquote house styles. I think that's still kind of a thing, I would imagine, more so at your bigger companies. And I just never fell into that artistic direction. Everything that I did was, or I do, is influenced from, that standpoint, from animation and things that have a lot more character and a lot more personality. So for me, it just kind of again, it just started happening organically, where people or opportunities in that genre just started to come my way, because I was already doing things that spoke that kind of language.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome that did come back around for you. I'd like to move on just a little bit and talk about what I tend to tell people on panels like this. It's a little bit awkward doing this from my home office, but I like to talk to people about what you need to have, and then what you need to know about the industry. And so I'll kind of go over this kind of quickly, and then I think we'll just sort of discuss it. And if I'm wrong, by all means, call me out. Let's hear about it. But what I tell people is basically it comes down to more or less three things in both categories. So what you need to have talent, which I think everybody has talent, one of the things that I talk about, like in my courses, is how it's not that you can't see the story or you can't see the picture you want to draw. It's that there's some malfunction between that and when you're typing or you're drawing it out. And that's where like the education and the practice and all that sort of comes in, as you get closer to actually being able to create what, your vision for it. And that's kind of how I think of talent. As talents, you've got that vision, you've got that drive. It's the persistence in learning, in growing, in yes, getting rejection letters, that sort of thing, but always pushing yourself further. And then luck. I mean, I think in all three of us talking about it, there's some instances of luck, whether it's your work, which is your work, which then gets noticed, but there's an element of luck there. Obviously, you have the skills and whatnot, or you wind up meeting the right person, and or I take an internship, and I'm like, wow, I didn't even know this was a thing, really, and it's awesome. So those are sort of the three things: the talent, the persistence, and the luck. That's what you need to have, like, personally. But the way I look at it too is you don't need all three necessarily. It tends to happen faster if you do, but talent and persistence kind of creates its own luck, like that sort of thing. And talent and luck, frankly, can top you over some of the persistence part. That's not the way I recommend going. but it can happen. And then there's persistence and luck, but you're a talentless hack. I mean, come on, we all know some folks like that, right? So that's how I see that: talent, persistence, and luck. And then what you need, well, let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about this other thing. But so that's what the individual wanting to work in comics, or wanting to tell a story and connect with people through their art. That's the way I see it. Have your experiences, either for yourself or other creators that have they borne out like that, Bon?
I mean, I'll say that, God, what was this? I heard this great definition of luck once that I think was something like, luck is timing plus preparation, or something like that.
Yeah.
And, and like, I, as one of the guys who for over 2 years was sort of like, I don't want to say the gatekeeper, but like the point at which a lot of that luck kind of manifested into actual jobs at Marvel, it totally was true. It was just, it typically came down to, did someone have, and this is where the preparation part of that comes, like, did someone have like the right portfolio or set of art samples, whether on their website or physical portfolio, that like within 30 seconds, an editor could look at that and say, okay, this person's going to solve my problem. And maybe this could be like, I swear there must have been 20, 25 artists who were at a level that I just kept on bringing them up to editors every week and saying like, these guys are ready, but there just wasn't an opening. And
so you're saying they had the preparedness part.
They had the preparedness part.
They just didn't have the timing part.
They didn't have the timing. And then so like, it just, one of the easiest ways that good timing starts manifesting is, I hate to put it this way, is when people leave, whether it's because they have broken relationships with their editors, or they, thankfully have found maybe better work at another industry. But a lot of times it's also that they got signed to exclusives by like Robert Kirkman, Mark Millar, DC Comics or something like that. But then it's like, okay, you've got 6 people who've disappeared, and now suddenly there's like 6 openings. And so folks who had already been at Marvel then start moving up. And then now it's like all these people that I'd have on my bench, even though I thought they might as well be full-timers already, now they can start flowing in and taking some of those additional jobs. But it is, I think, that combination of, you've got those samples, you have that portfolio set up in such a way where within 30 seconds, someone is like, yes, this person can solve my problem. And then, when that opportunity arises, whether it's like 6 months from now, or I hate to say it, 6 years from now, you can take that opportunity.
Sanford?
Yeah, it's funny because me and Bond, I don't know if we actually worked together, but we've had these kind of interactions where when he was at Marvel, it was those kind of exchanges where I would have, when I was trying to get over there, I think we met at a convention, which is always kind of the more concrete way to make inroads at Marvel, DC, if you're making this, having that actual FaceTime, personal, person to person. And I think we either came by my table and I say that to young artists all the time. Like these days, the internet has kind of changed everything. That's kind of like you can be your own convention, if you will, because editors are looking online every day, really. Instagram is a hotbed of just talent, and editors know where the talent is. They know where to go, because a lot of these editors, the newer ones, they grew up in this era, so they know how to look for this talent. And but there is something to be said still about the person to person going to the conventions and showing your and having that connection time. And to some degree, I would say, to Bon's point, you can almost defy the luck and the preparedness and the talent if you have relationships. If you're connected enough, there's something there that a publisher, editor, because you got this intangible thing that goes beyond the three main things, that they just feel like, as much as there's not a opening, I'm going to create something, or at least if there's something coming up, I'm going to make it my mission to make sure these set of artists are in here, because it's obvious they got the talent. It's obvious they got the preparedness and all that stuff. And even though the road is real narrow, I'm going to try to get as many of these guys in, and I'm going by creating something that will get them in. And there, you almost kind of have to know the people that have that kind of position. Like, not every editor and publisher can do that. But I was savvy enough to kind of know, okay, this person, he may like what I do, but he doesn't really have the decision-making power to make some things happen. So I just had to do a little bit more homework, and try to gain some of these other relationships with people, but who's there that can actually make the decisions to make things happen,
while also not like ignoring somebody that's like, you don't want to give off that vibe of like, you're not worth my time right now, because then
right.
when they do get into that place of decision making, they remember that.
That's true. Well, yeah, to your point, I mean, I think that's part of, I can go off of my personal experience. It's a balance. You have to be able to say, all right, I know this person right here, this person in position, this person who has the position to make decisions is probably someone I need to really grow a relationship with. But to some degree, let me also understand that I probably wouldn't have even had that opportunity to know that person if it wasn't for that editor who may not have the position, but that they're trying, that they're, you also know that they are a fan of your work, and you definitely want those people in your corner as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, I think you're right so much that that's pretty much the first topic of my next three things about what you need to know about the industry. And literally the first thing I have is networking / gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Because that's really a lot of what networking is about, is identifying, as you were talking about, is identifying those gatekeepers, who has the authority to say yes, or even sometimes who's well liked within the office. And so there's a better chance that if they pitch a thing, that it gets through.
Yeah.
And a lot of that too, because it's a fairly small industry, people leave, new people come in, people change companies. If you start to get in, friendly or friends with, or what have you, with with good people that are in editorial positions and positions like that, they tend to move company to company. Like it's been kind of fascinating to me to see the group of editors that I came in with at Marvel, that we've all, like really one, kind of two maybe of that group are still at Marvel. Another one's at IDW. Another one, was at Valiant for a number of years, like pretty, high up, both like in editor-in-chief type roles. So you see people just expand out, and then I was like, oh, hey, I was friends with these guys for a couple of years, and now I'm friends with people at all these different places, So definitely, and I want to get back to the idea of gatekeepers, but I'll just hit on these other 2 points real quick. I always feel like creators, especially, need to surround themselves with good people. Because you're often working like solitary. Not that like every creator gets depressed because they're all alone, but like it just really helps to kind of be able to get out of your own head, have that kind of support, have people that are supporting your creative endeavors, and making sure that you're kind of curating your friend group so that they're not pulling you down with a lot of negativity and that kind of thing. And they really are supportive, because starting out is, for most people, kind of a longer process and a difficult one. And so that's one that I have really found, certainly in my own life, has been huge. And then the other one is that drive to push yourself, and not just creatively, but also like career wise, to go like, I want to make new contacts because I want to do something, either I want to do something with this publisher or with this editor or with this, writer or artist, or I just want to try something new and I want to push myself in a new direction. So I always feel like those are the things that everybody needs to be focused on in terms of what you need to know about the industry and what the industry is going to demand from you. Did I leave anything off of that list, do you guys think?
No, it got me thinking that I gave myself a challenge at the beginning of the year, based off of another acquaintance's challenge. He was doing this make a new contact once a year thing, or once every day. And I was like, I don't think I'm not that good at making a new networking contact, but at least once a week. And with everything going on, that kind of fell behind the wayside. But like I was looking forward to, especially with convention season, to just like going out of my comfort zone and trying to make connections, not even with just people within comics, but other people at conventions and meetings like that who might have an interest in comics, or like what Sanford was just talking about, but maybe they're working both in comics and animation, maybe they're working in multiple mediums. But it's one of those things where like you just keep adding contacts to your network, and then eventually things come together and work out for you for like a new opportunity you never saw coming.
Yeah, I think conventions are definitely they kind of go like you said, because they're online. There are a lot of opportunities now for young artists, or artists in general, to get those opportunities. But there's that intangible thing, because once I meet you, once I have that interaction in that sense, now, truth be told, you may not be the most talented person, but there's something about your, the personality and just your demeanor that just gives me a lot more trust, that, okay, I'm putting myself in the editor's position now, that, wow, this person is very, the eye contact and it's all those things that we were taught, growing up, some of those values that were instilled in us, and you have those, when you have those things or display those things, it just makes a world of difference. I know for a fact that I got a few opportunities, not every opportunity, but there were a few, simply because I had that contact and those conversations where I just showed a certain demeanor that appealed to people. And you can't, that's, I guess that's taught. Like I just said, it can be taught, but at the same time, it is something that you have to keep in practice too. You just can't. Some people can they're just naturally outgoing, but I think you guys said it earlier. We're not naturally outgoing simply because of our work. 90% of the time we're in a studio, isolated. This whole social distance thing is nothing to us. Because we lived it way before this time. So my take is the more opportunities you have to put that into practice, the better.
Yeah, I definitely agree that making that personal connection is it's both better and easier. Like it's like I kind of look at it as sort of like rings like on a target, like the bullseye, like the tightest bond that you're going to make with somebody that you physically hang out with and interact with, and you can read each other's body language. There's just a lot more going on, and it becomes sort of a stronger bond. And then there's sort of these these circles going out that like phone conversation or Zoom chats or whatever, and then as you go out it's over email, and then it's sort of you're on the periphery if you're just like interact with jokes over Twitter. Like that's not nothing, but it's not like call you up and get a gig typically. But it's really, really interesting. And one of the things that I think has happened, I'm curious if you guys see this to be the case also, but Sanford, you largely have an audience that you built from scratch by going out and finding that audience and showing your art around. But you've built an audience. Now I wouldn't say that's because there were gatekeepers that were like in your way. I mean, I think you were, like you were saying, network and everything, you're getting through the gatekeepers, you know how to play that game. But it illustrates the idea of a way to be in comics without needing to get through gatekeepers. And so I was just kind of wondering if my impression has been that for a lot of creators these days, that there are ways around those gatekeepers, that you can be your own gatekeeper. You want to publish and print your own comic, you can do that more easily today than maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Would you guys agree with that, or would you say no, not really?
No, not really. I was kidding, man. No, I think you're right. You're dead on. I mean, we've been saying this throughout the panel, is that this day and age, you can be your own gatekeeper. There's a lot of resources. I mean, and let's just be honest. I mean, printing is not even a thing to be concerned about anymore. You don't have to print. You can do, the digital platforms, and I will be honest with you. Just we've got a hard lesson here recently by the pandemic. Just how much how dependent we were, the immediate industry, how dependent we were on the actual printed side of it, and we were left with, the only other alternative was to do the digital side, or at least learn it. So the industry, the core industry, has a lot of catching up to do. They skirted around this for a decade now. For the digital thing, dip your toe in and you jump back. And I'll be the first to admit, I love printed media. But at the same time, I know that as the world changes, we have to really be on board with it. And a lot of these young artists are coming up already in that frame of mind. They're not even thinking about the printed side of things. Everything is from the digital aspect. So it's even more empowering. They feel even more empowered. They don't even. I did a class a few years back where I asked. It was about 50 students in the class, and I asked how many of you guys have aspirations of working for Marvel or DC. 3 people raised their hands, man. And of course, I asked the second question about doing their own thing. Everyone else raised their hand, and that's just that's a microcosm of where this generation and everything after that that's where they're at. So they've been coming up already feeling empowered and feeling that they're their own brand and their own, gatekeeper. So, I had to take a step back and learn from them. That's kind of how anything that I have right now is probably because I just said, you know what, this ain't I can't go totally this way anymore. I have to do some of these things here in order to stay relevant or to grow or whatever. And, I'll give my hats off to someone like Jim Lee. I think he's a perfect example of, the old way, and he's just adapting this new way without losing his identity of where he came from, right? I mean, he's super engaged online. He has his own Twitch, which I don't even have that, and he's, I just watched him and I studied the way he was interacting. He knows that these kids don't know who he is. And he's not, well, I'm Jim Lee, I'm the publisher, like in this circle, he has that air about him, right? Or he can carry himself that way. There, he's just some dude drawing. So what's this old guy doing drawing these? Oh, he draws cool characters. Hey, draw, and these kids are just trolling him and he's laughing along. I'm like, wow, would I be able to do that? Would I be able to adapt to that whole thing? How many other artists could put their personas or egos aside to, be a part of that? And he did it. And there's other artists that do it as well, but him doing it, now you see just how it's transcending. Now that audience is starting to come into his original space. Like now they're like, oh, we trust this guy enough. He's just not some old dude, grumpy, and he's laughing along. He's right along with us. And now, because again, it goes back to that whole thing I was saying earlier about that interaction. Now they trust him. So he can say, hey, check out this Batman book that, you don't read comics, but you should. Here's, and I'm like, man, if we get another 200 artists doing something like that, these kids, you never know. They could get into, I think the industry would grow and change, So, those are the kind of things I'm starting to do. I'm continuing to do, is just learning the spaces that they're in and being comfortable or willing to be uncomfortable to get to, to the end goal. And that's to, build our brands and keep this industry alive, moving forward too.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's more tools than ever to get your comic in someone's hands. Completely divorced from the direct market, comic book stores, whatever. And those tools have been around a while. And the pandemic has forced, I think, a lot of people, to Sanford's point, to reassess. Oh wait, like what are these tools that, like Gumroad, Webtoons, and using Kickstarter for funding? Like, what are these tools that have been around for years that we just haven't taken advantage of? And they've been there. And so it's just been really fascinating over the last several months, seeing how like Webtoons does daily comics. And when DC started doing their daily digital comics, it caused an uproar, as if no one had ever heard of that before. But it's like Webtoons has been doing that for years. So it's been interesting seeing just a lot of people. To Sanford's point, there's a whole generation where this is normal. But then there's a whole other set of generations where they're just discovering it right now, and they we gotta catch up and learn as quickly as possible.
Let me share this point too, and this might be kind of the elephant in the room, but there are a lot of folks, to Bon's point, that are balking at a lot of the decisions that are being made as the pandemic continues to impact our industry and things of that nature. And a lot of people are balking at this stuff. I'm of the mindset that if it's too much, then you probably, maybe this ain't for you anymore. If it's changing too fast or not in the direction you want it to go or whatever, maybe that's something that you want to, or just be happy with the space that you're in and accept whatever comes your way, because that's the only alternative. You can either get on board or, get off, to some degree. And I know that sounds real, harsh or whatever, but I've had conversations with, let's just be honest, with comic store retailers. They I just don't understand this whole thing. It's going to hurt our industry. I'm like, this industry's been hurt long before you. It's just now it started to come to surface. Like so many things we've seen in this country, so many things have been around forever. We've been talking about it, and now it's come to head, and now you're just going to have to deal with it. And I think that's the part that, I say to people, as this stuff continues to go, because it's not going anywhere. You can go sit in this little box over here, but that stuff is still going to be there. The changes are going to be coming moving forward. So,
yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I remember, it reminds me, like, this was the mid sort of 2000s, but I was at a convention. I was working at Marvel, and a guy had come up to me, knew who I was, recognized my name from the books, and came up and was just on this tirade about recent issues of Thor. And he was just telling me how, like, I was forcing him to read this, and it was, he just really didn't like it, and we're ruining the character. Cats and dogs living together. You get the gist.
Right.
And,
same old, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I said to him, like, and I think at the time comics were $2.25. And I was like, you know what? You can just save spending $2.25 each month and, like, just not buy something you don't like. Like, that's okay. Like, that's your decision. It's also a pretty good way to let me know that you're dissatisfied with it. Like, I notice when the money's not coming in, then we're forced to make a change. And I just remember, like, this look on his face that, like, somebody was like, you're telling me, like, I don't have to buy this. And hopefully they weren't, like, insulted. Like, I wasn't trying to say, like, don't ever buy a Marvel comic. I was just saying, like, check out take that $2.25, check something else out that maybe is for you. Just because the one comic that you read month after month maybe isn't for you anymore, that may mean that you've grown apart from it. It may mean it's grown apart from you, but it doesn't mean there's nothing for you. Like, go look for something else. And there's a lot of people that are adapting that I commend, especially a lot of retailers right now with the pandemic that have had to adapt, immensely. But, like, there was never, there's this underlying assumption that things weren't changing before. They were just different before, but they're always changing, whether it's the comics industry or life in general or society or whatever. Like, things are always changing. That's the only thing that is always happening. And so it wasn't that things didn't change before and they're changing now. It's just that you were a part of that change maybe, or you agreed with whatever those changes were at those times. And it gets difficult as we get older. I want to yell at kids to get off my lawn all the time just because I'm old now. And I feel like that's what we do. But yeah, the adaptation thing is huge, even as, as an artist, like, looking at the actual art itself, like, you've got to evolve the way that you draw. You've got to evolve the way you write. Otherwise you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And then what's the point? We should probably wrap this up because I think we're about to go over our time, actually. I would love to hear any final thoughts from you. But before we do the final thoughts, thank you both for joining on the Comics Experience panel on Breaking Into Comics. Please check out comicsexperience.com. And Sanford and Bon, where can people find you online? You're not in Artist Alley right now. So
we're not. Oh, no. Wait a minute. I was lied to. They told me. Anyway, you can find me Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Sanford Greene.
And I'm on Instagram as Bonstrosty, and Twitter as Karma Thief. That's karma_thief. And also at comicsexperience.com.
Awesome. Is there any final thought, any one piece of advice that we didn't cover that you think everybody needs to hear?
All that being said, please buy comics. Support the comic stores, support the retailers, support the creators.
Yeah, I would give
It
that a
doesn't
double
matter if
thumbs up.
right. If it doesn't matter if it's digital or printed. If you're not supporting, none of it will be around. We're not supporting. But I do thank those who have supported us, in our endeavors. But we need to continue that support.
Absolutely. Bon?
Yeah. I mean, there's some talk that comics were on pause, but they really weren't. Comics are always being created. Creators, you can't stop creators from creating. And if there's one thing I can tell the people, it's like the way you break in and stay in, as we've been talking about, keeps evolving, keeps changing. And don't let anyone tell you that you haven't broken in yet. Don't let anyone kick you out of comics. Like, of all the mediums out there, comics probably provides the most amount of control of your own destiny and career. So keep creating.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that too. Especially, the note that I usually end on. So thanks for hitting it, Bon, but or stealing it from me. But is that you are the one that gets to control whether or not you're breaking into comics or not. That is really a decision that you, as the creator, get to make. So don't give that power to somebody else by asking them for permission. You could just decide you're going to go make comics and then go make the best comics you can. Thanks again, everyone, and hope you're all having a good San Diego Comic-Con at home. And if you do ever see us again at shows, please stop and say hello.